Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra,
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people.
associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Welcome to this episode of the Software People Stories. I hope you had a wonderful start to the new year. And I'm very happy to share this episode that is special for multiple reasons. This is one of the few episodes when I had the conversation in person, and that was also video recorded with a fireplace in the background on a very cold day. So you'd be able to watch this conversation as a video on the PM Power YouTube channel as well. Today, I'm in conversation which was recorded in November 2022, much before ChatGPT was made available to the public and the subsequent increased interest in large language models. My guest today, Steven Aberle, is a founder of a company that is in stealth mode, working on domain-aware large language model-based processing for very niche applications. In this conversation, Steven shares how he joined the military halfway through college and then went back to finish his studies, getting interested in IT during the military service, also navigating away from the back end to the front end work, focusing on how users interact with systems and getting into usability areas, and being in the Washington, D.C. area, getting to work on defense-related areas. And while working on large defense proposals, the need to be technical, unique, and bring out the uniqueness of the proposed approach was something that he was naturally doing. The challenge for small technology companies to break into the defense procurement space and how the whole process of writing proposals was something that could be daunting for some of them, created a spark of an idea. He also shares a couple of challenges with open large language models, which is about the training being only on open content available, thereby missing the contextual insights that are more valuable. And also, none of the data that is generated can be attributed to the source material in like an explainable AI. I asked him about his own career and the progress where he has been into different topics over different stages in his career, how he organizes his own learning even when moving across specialization areas. He said that it is always about data, and his experience with IT, particularly ETL approaches, including working with unstructured data, about being a full stack engineer and being aware of many areas, and not really being an expert in all of them, but then pick some things where he can go much deeper to be a T-shaped individual. And how he considers the transformers approach as the next big wave in IT after the cloud that happened a couple of decades ago. The concept or role of a solutions architect and how that may be implemented in a large language model is something that he shares. Other aspects related to large learning models and content or data, more than just text, to also include images, figure descriptions, and how those can be handled. And how the generative AI has made the life of, say, graphic designers or UX specialists much easier, where it can also be used to capture conversations with solutions architects, use a transformer to generate a proposal language based on that, etc. Listen on. Yeah, hi, Steven. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. How are you, sir?
Yeah, good.
Awesome. All right, we've got video going, and so that's a relatively new thing for your podcast. We are in St. Paul, Minnesota today, and it's somewhere around 8 degrees out. And
We do have a nice fireplace going.
and we have the fire going in the background.
Yeah.
And this is our home. My home, and we'll have kids pitter-patting around. All the kids are together and running around having a good time. So you may get a cameo guest appearance from some of the young ones.
Yeah, that's a new one for you.
Yeah.
So before they come here,
Yeah.
we could start with your origin story and how you got associated with, let's say, IT solutions or what you've been doing,
Yeah,
your career trajectory.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great question. So let's see. So I went to college for a couple of years, right? And I think this is a pretty typical story in the United States, and you run out of money very quickly. So I went to college for a couple of years, and then I joined the military. And so I was in the military for about 4.5 years. I went back and finished, though after that, on kind of program that they had for veterans. But when I was in the military, I certainly had an interest in information technology, right? And that's a little bit where I started out as well in my collegiate journey. And it sort of led down this path of, I started out in computer science, and I really, really loved design. I loved the ability to create code that could then transform into some visual item that someone would click, right? And, of course, that's interaction design, that's human computer interface, HCI, and user interface design, all those things. And so I found myself sort of drifting farther away from the back end as I went throughout my career into the front end and the design of things and how users interact. And it consumed quite a bit of my career. But where I got where I am today primarily was, being in the Washington, D.C. area, here in the United States, and you're an engineer, you're a software engineer, you sort of just naturally get sucked up into this world of defense and aerospace, right? It's kind of, it's where all the jobs are for kind of young people and
one of the largest spenders as well, right?
And they spend quite a bit of money, right? Yeah, in defense and aerospace world, and they're doing just so many different. I mean, they're built planes, trains, right? The bombers, the fighters, the equipment, the tanks. But then in the public space and the intelligence space, all the software that's built that helps protect the nation, and the wonderful things that are done there from a software standpoint, all of that's kind of aggregated in the defense and aerospace world. And so when you're introduced to that world, you learn a whole lot about a thing called proposals and capture and business development and writing proposals. Just about any given day in the United States, the way the government procures services, IT services or equipment or tanks or aircraft, right? All those things. They do that through a process called RFPs and proposals, requests for proposals. There are like 30,000 of those things that come out every single day. There are 200,000 companies that compete for that work. They all have one thing in common. To compete for that work, you have to write a proposal. And so I've been writing proposals the vast majority of my career, thousands of pages across 16, 17 years in the defense industry. And that's because they have to be technical. They are required to be unique, on target, technical text that talks about how your company would implement any given service, any given product, any given software solution. So the text must be domain aware, right? The person writing it has to be really smart. And I've been doing this for a very long time, writing proposals. It's kind of the origin story, which leads me to where I am now. We created a piece of technology and kind of wrote a patent around it called generative stitching. But basically what it does is it enables domain-aware generative AI. And probably everyone who listens to these podcasts is going to be familiar with the large language model world, the world of large language models, transformers, and its ability to predict text, right? And it does a very good job at that. From a mathematical standpoint, really what's happening is there are these amazingly large autocomplete algorithms where you can predict a character in the sequence of a word and words in the sequence of a sentence, right? And predict sentences in the sequence of a paragraph, so on and so on. And I thought that these were just astounding because I've been studying artificial intelligence, primarily, everybody starts out kind of in the statistical learning, and then deep learning became really just something that took over the world in at least the computer science world in 2014, 2015. And then, I've been experimenting with those and utilizing those. And then transformers came along, and these multi-billion parameter, up to trillions now, parameter models that can predict text. And so I wanted to harness the idea of large language models to solve a very difficult and brutal pain point that I had experienced across all those years, those 17 or 18 years. And that is simply the number of resources required to write a proposal is astounding. These proposals you have to write could be anywhere from 60 to 120 pages. It takes a team of 20 or 25 people to do it. It's almost impossible for young, small businesses who have great technology, they've created something new, to break into the world of defense. And it's part of what we call the valley of death, bridging the gap between technology companies and Department of Defense. And so I wanted to make that process more efficient. So again, we created a piece of technology that can look at domain-aware technology, domain-aware data, and feed it and influence large language models so it can understand a domain very, very well. The problem, there's a couple problems primarily with large language models, is number one, they're not domain aware. They're trained on pretty much the vast majority of text that's on the open internet. That means it's non-proprietary, it's open, it's not very smart, from a scientific standpoint. It's, the majority of the internet is marketing copy. So that's kind of what it can do. There's lots of systems and services that help you generate marketing copy. And I think that is neat when I first experimented with them, but that's where it stops. It's just neat. It doesn't know anything about me. It cannot do domain specific tasks. And that was a problem, a major problem for me, because I was trying to get it to write proposals. It cannot do so unless you find a way to feed thousands of pages of domain specific data and then influence the large language models. That's the first problem with large language models. The second problem is none of the data that is generated in a generative AI model can be specifically attributed to its source material, ground truth, just the way that the model works, right? You feed it just tons of data it wants to sort of predict. But
the explainable AI
it is the explainable AI piece. And so we broke that barrier down where we can understand and know when the AI generates text, because of the way that we feed it domain aware data, how we structure, how we parse, how we normalize all of that data. We keep track of the provenance, if you will, of every 0 and 1. And when we generate language, it allows our customers, our beta testers, because we're a company that's still in stealth, to know exactly where that language is being generated from. So when it generates an answer to a question, it generates an answer to a new task, or it generates new language against, say, a new requirement or shall statement from a statement of work, then the user can trust the text that's being generated because they can open up the PDF to the exact page where the large language model then generated the text. All right. And so that's what we're working on now. How long was that? My wife, by the way, everybody, told a joke right before we started the podcast that I like to talk. And it's true. And I probably just talked for like 15 minutes straight, right? So my apologies. But that's what I'm interested in. That's kind of where I come from. I've never been a CEO of a company before. This is the first company that I've started. And it was solely based on this huge pain point, this massive pain point that I've experienced for 15 years. And myself and my co-founder, her name is Chicha, unbelievably smart. We have written tons of proposals together for the last several years. We knew there had to be a better way. Now, I think that is a very good reason to start a company, right? To solve something that has just everybody I know hates the necessity of the process of writing proposals, but it must be done. There's nothing you can do about it. And so if I can create some technology that makes that process more efficient, right? And, turns what is kind of viewed as this brutal, painful process into something that, might resemble a cathedral, then that is the purpose of our business.
Yeah, very interesting. Of course, this triggers a lot of questions because we've covered a lot
Tons of questions.
Yeah.
Let's
So the first thing is
this conversation.
First thing is, you said starting in the military, getting into human interface design, and then getting into proposals, defense, and everything else, and the leading edge things on AI and machine learning and all that. So how do you organize your own learning over the years and either add to it or move on to different domains? And that too, you've done it fairly quickly.
It's interesting. Because one thing I forgot to kind of mention was, along the way, when I was designing the user interface components for different types of systems, and many of them, I built a bunch of products. What I realized was it's all about the data. It is always 100% about the data. And so I kind of took a little bit of a detour into the world of ETL, extract, transform, load, dealing with unstructured data, because in the government and in the world of intelligence and in the world of corporate even, right? You've heard the statistics, almost 80% of the entirety of the archive, the corpus of data at any given company is unstructured. Now, that's very hard to deal with, unstructured data. So I kind of took a detour into learning everything I could about ETL from an unstructured data perspective. And it turns out really that's the key to create domain-aware generative AI, right? The structuring, the normalization, the application of a multi-layer chain of algorithms that, the first thing they do is optical character recognition, right? OCR. Then we look at the layout. Then we look at, are there tables? What figures, what are the images? And, one thing sort of leads to another, where you realize over time that just about everything is connected in the engineering world. There are separate titles, for things, right? You know, you have a database engineer, you have a backend engineer,
Right.
you have an ETL engineer, you have an API engineer, you have a user interface. But you've got to know them all. You've got to have an understanding of them all if you're truly going to get at a very specific pain point and create a service that users love, right? You have to understand many different facets. And, you know, sometimes people talk about it in terms of being like a full stack engineer, right? And, you know, that means a little bit something different, I think, to me. But, you know, if you're a full stack engineer, you know, how focused can you be on any one given thing? And sometimes it just takes time, right, to learn all that stuff, to learn that everything's connected, that it's all about the data. You know, the data, which is, you know, step zero of a serial process that could be 100 steps long. And at the end of that is a user clicking a button, right? It all tracks, making sure that button does what it's supposed to do. It tracks back to the data at step zero, right? So that's a good question. You know, everything is interconnected, and you have to learn to kind of take those hits as they come and be fluid, and, you know, go from one area to the next, and maybe not be as you know, an expert as you might want to in one very specific thing, right? But if you can be multidisciplinary, full stack, and kind of understand that entire process, then you're on your way to being a very good programmer.
What is your secret sauce? You talk about T-shaped individuals where you have the breadth on many things, but then probably go deep into a few things.
You got to go deep, when it's required. Sort of what, you know, when you find something that clicks. And when I began experimenting with transformers and large language models, I went deep. And they were just starting, you know, even back when Elon Musk was the CEO of OpenAI, right? And he had floated that company, and their purpose, right? Back then, they were a research organization that were trying to bring about AGI, artificial general intelligence. And, you know, AGI implies multimodality. And the first thing that they tried to teach it was to speak and see. So speak is GPT-3 and 4 and 1 and 2, and C is things like Dolly, right? And so I went super deep, into large language models, understood how they're trained, how they're influenced, and you can take these detours in your career, and they are very, very good things, right? But everything that you've done leading up to that point, you know, will help you be very good at whatever you're going to focus in on at that point in your career. But for me, I was just so convinced that transformer. Here's what I say before we go into the next question. This is super important, I think, and I've told people this a lot, that every 25 years, a transformational, profound technology gets unleashed to the world of enterprise business. 25 years ago, at the turn of the century, it was cloud, right? And even before AWS, with Rackspace, you know, all the progenitors of that era, right? And of course, then Microsoft does Azure and AWS and GCP. That was a profound transformation in the world of business. And now, at the turn of the century, right, or now at the quarter century, right, to 2020 through 2025, I believe transformers are the next transformational change in the world of business, and I'm sure of it, right, from what I've witnessed in its ability to be assistive to the human, right? It cannot replace the human. Not quite yet. And I think we're far away from that, but it can create huge efficiencies for humans in the business world, right? Like what we're trying to do with our company, Rohere.
Okay. Yeah. Any solutioning, like you also mentioned that there are different specializations and either back and front end or particularly for systems integrators. When you have to bring in different pieces together, there's always a chief architect.
Sure.
So when you do this through generative AI and you feed it in a lot of these things, because all the specializations are very different, it's also about how they all come together.
Yep.
And you did mention some of the clauses, the shall clauses. That
Yeah,
may be
shall
there,
statements.
right?
Yep. Mhm.
How do you, one, interpret that, create a point of view, and then generate your proposal?
Yeah. So we have different capabilities that we've built inside the software, and one thing that we've built is called the solutions architect, the AI solutions architect.
Oh, okay.
Now, when you are generating proposals, it is certainly really important about what you've done before as a company. We call that past performance, right? How have you implemented this solution? Now, if you take a large language model that understands language, human language, then you should be able to pass it different types of adverbs that can significantly influence its output. Is, am, are, was, were, being, been, have, has, had, do, does, did, right? These are very important words. So how have we implemented IT services versus how should we implement this technology, this technology set, right? Then it's an indicator for the AI to adjust how it should predict the text. And then we can pick up on that human input. How should we implement this piece of technology? Then reference all of the technical solutions that they have built before. Then allow the system then to be creative, change some settings in the model parameters, right? The model settings. This thing called temperature sometimes that we adjust that roughly corresponds to creativity. And when a user says, I need help, there's just, we don't have information specific to this. We haven't solutioned this before. And
yeah, that is going to be my next question.
I need to ask the system then to be creative for me. But this is what a computer does much better than a human could, your architect, right? Which is at any given point in time, I can immediately recall thousands of artifacts and objects that are specific to how my company has solutioned against any given problem set at any given time. And I can do that in somewhere around 0.03 seconds, 30 milliseconds, right? And then, of course, then we let the large language model take over and be creative and solution. And so that role of solutions architect, over time at these companies, because they all have large stables of solutions architects, right, have built dozens and hundreds of solutions and put them down on paper. And what the large language model then does, what it allows you to do, is learn from their experience and learn from what they've written down and how they solution to any specific problem set. And now once I have that, and what Rohirrim does that is different is I can take all of that unstructured data and feed it into the model. Then the model can then predict how your company could solution a new problem set that it's not seen before.
Wow.
Right? Yeah.
But one thing is, at least at that level of creativity, of problem solving, the solution architects may use more than just words.
100%.
They may use diagrams, they may use tables, they may use data and all that. So how?
So that's right. Now, of course, so large language models are very good at talking, right? So that's text, but then also the vision modality, sight. And when we ingest documents, we'll things like OpenCV and edge detection for images. So we'll crop images out. And also there's a figure description, right? In proposals. and that figure description describes what's in the image. Well, now that I've cropped out the image, why don't I OCR it? Right? Okay, now let's take it a step further. What is this image related to? What paragraph heading is it related to? What's the text above and below it? Now we've got to what we call multimodality. So I know what an image is. I know the text around it. So I know the language. So if a solution architect is trying to generate an image, create an image, or even just find the most relevant images they've created before, based on feeding it an image or a description, a textual description of what they're trying to build, right? What they're trying to create. Then we will find the most relevant images based on that textual description. Okay. Then we combine, and by the way, that's neural AI-based search. That's vector search, right? Word embeddings in a vector space. Outperforms keyword search by a mile in just about every category. But then you look at the transformer model, where then the user could say, I don't like this graphic. It doesn't cover what I need it to. Let me tell the language model, let me tell Dolly how I would like this image to change or be modified. And then the model modifies it according to your textual prompt. Is it good enough?
Possibly also capture why.
Right. So certainly that's associated to the text.
Yeah.
Right. But then what happens is, again, because this is assistive, right? Then you've just cut out probably 3 or 4 hours of trying to find that data, modify that data, because that takes a graphics engineer, right? Explain what this graphic is about, because you've created language for that. And so, what used to take 6 hours now can take 3 minutes. Wow. Right. And then you get that description, that new graphic that, say, the language model created or Dolly created, back to the graphics designer. The graphics designer takes over. They appreciate it a whole lot more because they don't have to interview you for 3 hours about what you're trying to create. So that's interesting. Now there's one other thing I'd like to say is solutions architects are sort of famous for, like you get a computer science degree, you go through an engineering school. It's about projects, really. There aren't a ton of papers that you write. You gotta learn to code. There are some papers, but a lot of them are much more comfortable talking about any given solution or demonstrating a solution. So when you give a solution architect a task of, listen, I have 10 shell statements or requirements, and can you write me 3 or 4 pages about how you would solution this? That is a very difficult task for them to do. You're looking at days. You got to stare at a blank piece of paper. Maybe they're excellent writers, right? Maybe you get lucky. Most of the time you do not. So then what you'll get back is like bullets, maybe. Well, I can take a bullet and I can recursively expound on that bullet according to how your company typically solutions for things. But then we can combine, again, multimodality of these large models, vision, speech, but what about hearing, right? Voice. And so why don't I interview that solution architect? Because solution architects oftentimes like to talk about the solution. They'll go on for 30, 40 minutes talking about how they might try and get it on a piece of paper, try and get them to write it on a piece of paper. It's very difficult. So let's just press the record button for 40 minutes while this solution architect talks about it, right? And then you press stop. Now you send that interview to the large language model. And because you know how the company writes their best proposals, right? Take that text that solution architect spoke, turn it into proposal language via the large language model. Ask it to transform it. So again, the human never goes away. The human cannot go away. The solution architect can never go away. But these technologies can be assistive. 100%.
Yeah, since this is domain-specific generative AI,
Yes.
is there a possibility that, let's say, there are 3 vendors responding to an RFP?
Right.
Obviously, the domain is the same.
Yeah.
And if they're all using your engine,
Right.
are there possibilities that they would all be strategically same or similar?
That's a great question. And a lot of the customers ask the same question.
His answer to that question and a lot more, including some questions that he asked me related to startups, effectively making this as a reversal of roles where the guest became the host on the next episode. Don't miss that.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.